Bonjour tout le monde, bienvenue à cette conférence de presse entièrement virtuelle qui rassemble 4 ministres du gouvernement. Donc, sans plus tarder, je vais leur céder la parole avant de la reprendre pour la période des questions.
Thank you very much. Hello everyone. Bonjour à tous. Merci d'être parmi nous aujourd'hui. I would like to begin by acknowledging that I am speaking to you today from the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. My colleagues, Ministers Champagne, Bibeau, Ng, Qualtrough, O'Regan, and I have just concluded our first supply chain summit. The supply chain is top of mind for Canadians, and I can assure you that it is also for our government. La chaîne d'approvisionnement est une priorité. We are working to make our supply chain even stronger and to ensure that what Canadians need reaches their households as quickly as possible. On that note, I want to thank all the workers who have been keeping our supply chains going throughout the pandemic. And I also want to say that a big threat to our supply chain remains to be COVID, and our best tool is vaccination. That is why our government will always encourage Canadians to get vaccinated. This supply chain summit was another step in our collaboration with industry partners. It brought together a range of national organizations, including business associations, manufacturers and exporters, as well as chief executive officers of railway, marine, air, trucking, and retail companies. Everyone who took part in today's summit is committed to making Canada's supply chain even more efficient, resilient, and reliable in the face of climate change and global COVID-19 pandemic. As we continue our work together, we will also continue to take action. Nous allons continuer à prendre des actions. This includes new strategies for the transportation sector workforce, new, more sustainable physical infrastructure, or making it easier for the transportation sector to adopt digital business methods. I want to stress that today's summit is not the end of the conversation, it is just the beginning. Over the coming months, we will follow up with a series of regional and industry sessions for different sectors. We will also develop a comprehensive action plan that will address constraints and ensure our supply chain is stronger and more resilient for the future and our changing climate. Today, I'm also announcing some next steps. Aujourd'hui, j'annonce certaines étapes. First, to further advance our work with the industry, we will create a new supply chain task force. The task force will consult with industry representatives and make recommendations on short and long-term actions for Canada's supply chain. In addition, Transport Canada will make an online portal available for stakeholders and businesses to be able to provide opinions and suggestions. Today, I'm also launching a new targeted call for proposals under the National Trade Corridors Fund. The fund will dedicate up to $50 million to support priority measures to relieve immediate supply chain congestions and aid the movement of goods at Canadian ports. This is in addition to the call for proposals we announced in December of last year, which focused on projects that improve the flow of goods and people in Canada as well as international trade. And Budget 2021 also provided an additional $2 billion to recapitalize the National Trade Corridor Fund that makes our supply chain more efficient and supports our economic recovery. Before I turn it over to Minister Champagne, I'd like to conclude by saying that an efficient and reliable transportation network is key to Canada's economic growth and supporting good middle-class jobs. This summit was an important milestone in addressing challenges, strategies, and next steps to support Canada's transportation supply chain. But the work must continue. Le travail doit continuer. Now, I'd like to invite my friend François-Philippe to say a few words. Merci. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le ministre Alghabra. Good afternoon, everyone. Real pleasure to be with you today. Merci, Madame Marquis, d'être là. Écoutez, ce matin, on a eu une très bonne discussion avec plusieurs représentants du secteur, de différents secteurs d'activité économique au pays. On a parlé, évidemment, comment on pourrait renforcer nos chaînes d'approvisionnement pour avoir des chaînes d'approvisionnement qui sont fiables et résilientes. Il y avait plus de 80 participants qui ont échangé des préoccupations, mais aussi des pistes de solutions, des idées pour nous permettre de rester compétitifs et certainement de voir comment on peut faire des partenariats publics-privés parce qu'on sait que la grande priorité, c'est de s'assurer que les produits et les biens arrivent dans les étagères pour les consommateurs et les consommatrices canadiennes, que nos industries puissent avoir les produits dont ils ont besoin pour continuer leur production et évidemment que comme pays, on a des chaînes d'approvisionnement résilientes pour nous permettre d'avoir une croissance économique stable au cours des prochaines années. Écoutez, chers collègues, on voit une chose, c'est que les chaînes d'approvisionnement se redessinent. C'est vrai qu'on voit plusieurs chaînes d'approvisionnement qui sont en train de s'ajuster pour bien remplir, j'allais dire, la demande qui vient du marché nord-américain et bien servir le marché nord-américain. On voit les chaînes d'approvisionnement, à mon avis, dans plusieurs secteurs qui passent de global à régional. On régionalise certaines chaînes d'approvisionnement et je dirais que la résilience est reine dans ce nouveau marché-là. Et je pense que le Canada peut faire partie d'être un chef de file dans ces nouvelles chaînes d'approvisionnement qui se veulent plus vertes, plus résilientes et je dirais même plus régionales. Ce matin, on a parlé non seulement comment on pouvait améliorer les infrastructures physiques, mais aussi les infrastructures digitales pour permettre justement aux entrepreneurs et aux commerces et aux citoyens d'avoir accès à ces produits-là de la chaîne d'approvisionnement. On a aussi misé sur des actions immédiates, stratégiques, avec un potentiel à long terme. Et je pense que le ministre a bien expliqué, c'est-à-dire qu'on aura un groupe de travail qui se penchera sur les chaînes d'approvisionnement. Il y aura un portail en ligne pour les gens de contribuer des idées et des pistes de solutions. Et on aura aussi un nouvel appel de proposition pour des projets pour les corridors de transport. Effectivement, de notre côté, au niveau d'Industrie Canada, ce qu'on mise beaucoup, c'est l'innovation dans les chaînes d'approvisionnement. On a vu, par exemple, deux exemples intéressants, un avec le port de Montréal et Milan à Montréal, où on utilise maintenant l'intelligence artificielle pour s'assurer que les biens qui arrivent au port de Montréal, spécialement dans le domaine médical, puissent se retrouver sur les tablettes rapidement. Et on a vu aussi un bel exemple du côté de l'Ontario, où on a développé une chaîne d'approvisionnement, ce qu'on appelle le Supply Chain Resiliency Platform, donc un outil technologique qu'on a fait avec Palantir et Martin-Réa qui va nous permettre ou qui permettent aux manufacturiers d'analyser, de prédire et de les alerter en cas de goulot d'étranglement dans les chaînes d'approvisionnement. Alors, l'autre aspect qu'on a fait, et je terminerai là-dessus, c'est ce qu'on voit qu'avec nos partenaires américains, européens, on essaie de développer des chaînes d'approvisionnement qui sont résilientes avec des partenaires fiables. C'est ce qu'on va continuer de faire. On le fait dans le domaine de la biofabrication. On va continuer de le faire dans le domaine des semi-conducteurs. On va le faire certainement dans le domaine des batteries. Et je pense que ça va nous permettre d'assurer la résilience de nos chaînes sur les décennies à venir. Donc, en terminant, je dirais, saisissons l'opportunité devant nous d'adapter nos chaînes d'approvisionnement pour l'économie du 21e siècle. Soyons ambitieux, ambitieuses dans nos actions et construisons ensemble des chaînes résilientes qui vont nous permettre de remplir les besoins des consommateurs et de l'industrie et de prospérer pour le long terme. Alors là-dessus, ça me fait plaisir de passer la parole à ma chère collègue, la ministre Bibeau. Merci.
Merci, François-Philippe. Bonjour à tous. Minister Alghabra, thank you for organizing this summit today. Notre chaîne d'approvisionnement fait face à des défis qui ont un impact sur tous les Canadiens, incluant les producteurs agricoles et toute notre industrie agroalimentaire. Le secteur ressent les effets du manque chronique de main-d'œuvre et les conséquences des changements climatiques. La pandémie exacerbe la pression sur l'industrie depuis maintenant 2 ans. Et malgré tout, nos productrices, nos producteurs, ainsi que nos transformateurs, nos transporteurs, nos inspecteurs aussi, les détaillants, réussissent à amener jusqu'à nos tables des aliments sains et nutritifs en quantité suffisante. Canadians should have confidence that our food supply is able to respond to demands and that our distribution system will continue to operate to meet our needs. Unfortunately, the pandemic has created enormous pressure and caused significant interruptions throughout the chain. Across Canada, we see how our industry continues to experience challenges in recruiting and retaining workers, just as it did even before the pandemic hit. We continue to see the impacts of climate change put stress on our transportation infrastructure, from roads to rail to ports. All of these factors underline both the vulnerability and the importance of an efficient and reliable supply chain to reduce the risk of disruption to our food system. Depuis le premier jour de la pandémie, notre gouvernement s'est mobilisé pour préserver la solidité de notre chaîne d'approvisionnement alimentaire. Nous avons, par exemple, investi 85 millions de dollars dans le Fonds d'urgence pour la transformation pour que les entreprises alimentaires puissent rendre leurs installations plus sécuritaires pour les employés. Nous avons lancé le programme de récupération des aliments excédentaires pour redistribuer les surplus liés aux fluctuations du marché vers les populations les plus vulnérables. Et en collaboration avec les provinces, nous avons établi le programme d'aide pour l'isolement obligatoire des travailleurs étrangers temporaires, les programmes pour compenser en partie les coûts additionnels associés à la rétention des bovins et des porcs sur les fermes. À cela s'ajoutent les programmes de prêts pour les entreprises et tous les secteurs et différentes subventions salariales. To those in our agriculture, food, and retail industry who have joined us today, I want to thank them for making the time to share their experiences, concerns, suggestions, and ambitions. I know there are no short-term fixes. Addressing the challenges facing the Canadian agriculture supply chain are diverse. I heard how important it is to have more data, the challenges that a lack of containers are presenting, and of course, the many issues surrounding labor shortages. Some highlighted how we need to prioritize critical goods and that some regulations need to be harmonized. The agriculture supply chain does not end at the retail store. 20% of goods are now sold via e-commerce. And while our supply chain has remained strong in many urban centers, remote communities continue to experience additional challenges. Our discussions from today reinforce the importance of doubling down on our efforts to address the challenges of congestion and bottlenecks in our supply chains, as well as labor shortages. And there is much more work to be done. Ensuring Canada is on solid footing for economic recovery with reliable access to food for all Canadians means taking meaningful actions now. I will continue to work closely with industry along with my federal, provincial, and international counterparts to ensure that Canada's agriculture and agri-food sector emerges from this crisis stronger than ever. Thank you. I will now turn it over to my colleague and friend, Minister Ng.
Merci beaucoup, Marie-Claude. Bonjour tout le monde. And this morning, we all had productive and insightful conversations and listened to industry leaders and on stakeholders. And with respect to my file, certainly on how Canada's work on international trade can contribute to strengthening our supply chains here at home. While a lot of focus has, of course, been on the domestic movement and supply chains, the fact is that supply chains have been disrupted around the world. Even before goods arrive at our Canadian ports or to get on our railways or transport trucks, they have faced delays caused by global production slowdowns due to COVID or because of issues, whether they be customs clearances or export restrictions. Le Canada est une nation forgée par le commerce où un emploi sur six dépend du commerce. Our supply chains reach beyond our borders and are underpinned by international trade rules, which the flow of our imports and exports depend on. That's been a big part of my work at the World Trade Organization, particularly leading the Ottawa Group alongside countries like Mexico, Japan, the EU, South Korea, Kenya, and others. Together with these international partners and others, In the G7 and G20 countries, we're working to ensure that crucial goods such as food, medicines, raw materials continue to flow into Canada and indeed around the world. This work, though, must continue to ensure that a rules-based, predictable trading environment, one that supports long-term supply chain resiliency and enables a strong and a sustainable economic recovery, and greater competition for our Canadian businesses. Our government is also working on providing more opportunities for Canadian businesses and workers to develop new supply chains through our free trade agreements. They already benefit from preferential access to markets here in North America through CUSMA, in Europe through CETA, and in the Asia Pacific with the CPTPP. We're also further increasing our footprint in the Indo-Pacific region, and we are entering trade negotiations with Indonesia and with the 10 countries that make up the Association of South Asian Nations, or ASEAN. Merci à tous ceux présents aujourd'hui d'avoir partagé leur expérience et leur expertise. And I want to be clear, our work doesn't stop here. We're committed to continuing working together. You've heard that from my colleagues, and to build up our supply chains and to get through this pandemic and certainly into the future. I want to thank you very much, and I believe we are now going to open up for questions.
Yes, we are. Thank you, Minister. So we have about 20 minutes for questions, and so we'll go over the phone to get the questions in. Operator?
Merci, thank you. The first question is from Kevin Gallagher, CTV National News. Please go ahead, à vous la parole.
Hi there. Can you tell me what you think of the convoy protests and some of the demands that we've heard, and also like the support for that from the Canadian Chamber of Commerce about supply chains being affected by the vaccine mandate at the border?
Let me take an attempt at answering this question. Kevin, thank you for this question. I've been speaking to the media over the last few days, providing answer. Look, in Canada, we cherish the ability for our citizens to assemble and protest peacefully, and we encourage vigorous debate about policies, and that continues to be the case. There's undoubtedly a lot of frustration across the entire country about COVID that we all share. And we're all keen on seeing the end of the pandemic come soon. And that's why our government is really focused on providing support to Canadians and focus on completing the war against COVID. And that's why vaccination is one of our most important methods or keys to tackling COVID. As far as mandate for vaccination to cross the border, this is something that our government has been consistent on from the beginning. We had a mandate for all travelers last summer that we exempted essential workers from, including truckers. Then we implemented a mandate for federal workers and the transport sector federally that included air, marine, and rail. At that time, we also gave truckers more time. And then last November, when we figured in consultation with the industry that there's critical mass among truck drivers where almost 90% are fully vaccinated, we announced last November that this mandate is coming into place. And it's important to note that it's in sync with what the U.S. are doing. So the U.S. also has a mandate at its borders for all truck drivers. Having said that, the reason why we're doing this is to actually ensure that there's more resilience in the supply chain. With more vaccination, we can reduce infection rates, we can use hospitalization rate, we can use absenteeism. And that's what the driver is behind our policy. And by the way, the science is quite clear about this. So that's not to dismiss the broader supply chains issue. There are broader supply chains issue. That's why we brought industry today. That's why we brought so many ministers today. And there's an action plan to move forward. So thank you for the question.
I'll take a follow-up. So what are the measures here, sort of the off-ramp, if you will? There was an Angus Street poll saying, that the majority of Canadians do want to see an end to restrictions and that sort of thing. So what's the responsible way to get through this together? And also, how can that line up with the plan to fix some of the issues that we've seen with the supply chains?
So, the biggest reason why we have mass supply chain disruption is COVID. There are other factors, clearly, but the reasons why all those factors got exacerbated and exposed is because of COVID and the impact that COVID has had on our economy and our society. And which is also linked to the frustration that you're talking about that the public has. Public now is really keen on ending COVID. We're all tired. We're all exhausted. We've sacrificed so much, businesses, jobs. But it's really important to take stock of what we as a country together have accomplished. We have the lowest rate of infection per capita in the developed world. We have one of the lowest death rate in the developed world. We have one of the highest vaccination rate in the world. We have recovered more than the jobs that we've lost during the pandemic. So it's really important to take stock in the fact that those measures, including vaccination, have helped us do better than most. That's, again, having said that, we want to finish this this pandemic and as quickly as possible. That's why we're focused on supporting Canadians during this difficult time, but we're focused on doing everything we can and relying on public health experts. They're the ones who are going to tell us, based on the data, based on the science, what stages are we getting into. And I'm really hopeful. I am confident. These measures are temporary. We've said that to Canadians, and we rely on public health advice. So the sooner we are out of this pandemic, the sooner we can start seeing adjusting these measures and easing those restrictions. Thank you.
Opérateur, prochaine question.
Merci. La prochaine question. Next question is from Jordan Press, the Canadian Press. À vous la parole. Please go ahead.
Oh, good afternoon, everyone. I'm just kind of curious about maybe in the short term, what exactly is going to be done to address which is the biggest issue, which is labor. I'm just curious if there is something on the table right now to help address the labor shortage that is ultimately a key driver of some of the supply chain issues we're seeing.
I'll take a jab at it, but I'll see if any of my colleagues want to answer this. Minister Qualtrough, by the way, was present at the summit to respond to this. So look, our government has actually had put together an action plan in recognition of the ongoing labor shortage. And let me try to summarize some of those measures quickly for you. First, you all heard us talk about childcare, $10 a day childcare. Why is that? One of the main reasons, and by the way, why is the business community supporting this initiative so heavily, is because they know it is a key driver for labor participation, particularly among women. We have seen the evidence from Quebec and other countries. So this will be one of our key elements for our labor shortages. Second, training. Minister Qualtrough has been supported by the Minister of Finance with investments for our training, skill development that will be deployed with partners to ensuring that we recruit the right type of and train the right type of workforce. Third, immigration. Immigration is going to be a key element of our way of addressing labor shortage. And yes, that has been somewhat impacted by COVID, but we still were able to successfully land 400,000 permanent residents at the height of COVID, which is a testament to Minister Mendicino and Minister Fraser. And lastly, in our plan was creating a tax credit for seniors who want to stay longer in the workforce. This will also ensure that we have more access to workers who have been thinking about retiring or thinking about staying, and maybe this will be an incentive for enticing them to stay in the workforce. That's roughly, but we certainly have a plan, and we certainly heard the industry today talking to us about the labor shortage that exists in our economy. And by the way, it's a phenomena in many other countries. I don't know if any of my colleagues want to add to what I said.
Well, but you said it well, Minister Alghabra. I may just try to add 2 or 3 things, Jordan, but I think your last comment, Minister Alghabra, embodies a bit. I mean, what you're seeing in the challenge around supply chains, you're seeing in the United States, you're seeing in Europe, you're seeing this is a global phenomenon, which is, you were right to point out, COVID has impacted supply chain and production in pretty much all the key manufacturing centers of the world. But one thing I think that our investments are paying off dividend is that we all know that talent attracts investments. I can tell you when I spoke to Moderna, when they were considering which country they would establish a base, biomanufacturing, by the way, is a good example of government policy, which we've been able to onshore some of the critical elements we need to ensure the health and safety of Canadians. And in my discussion with the CEO, the first thing he asked is, do you have enough talent to support our growth for the next 20, 30 years? And that's exactly what we've been focusing on, upskilling, reskilling, making sure that we have the talent to support the growth of the companies in Canada and those that want to come. And I would say temporary foreign workers. I mean, we heard from the participants today, and what we are focusing on with the task force of that Minister Alghabra mentioned is strategic immediate action with a long-term vision. We need to position, I keep saying, global supply chain are being redefined. They're becoming more regional. Resiliency is king. I see it in the battery ecosystem. I see it in the biomanufacturing ecosystem. I see it in the semiconductor. And I think this is playing to Canada's strength because when you're talking about responsible, sustainable supply, stability, previsibility, traceability, quality, those are playing to Canada's strength. But certainly the labor issue is paramount in order to make sure that we have the type of resiliency that we need in this country to prosper.
So maybe then as my follow-up, given all of that, and given the fact, but more so to the point, let me ask this. The Bank of Canada's position last week was that supply chain issues may have peaked in some areas and are going to ease, and that they expect that to ease over the next couple of months, and that's why inflation rates are supposed to drop at the end of the year. Given that projection, has the government provided anyone who was at this summit an assurance that you'll avoid any policies that could aggravate these bottlenecks further?
Thank you for the question. Every policy that our government is taking is meant to add more resilience to our supply chain. It's meant to add more redundancy to our supply chain and to add more strength and fluidity to our supply chain. And that will remain our main focus. It is true that some indicators give us hope that some of the congestion challenges are easing, but we cannot lose sight of the fact that some of these problems have been exposed because of COVID. We shouldn't just look the other way. We need to make sure that we tackle them. We need to add more redundancy. We need to add more resilience. So I can assure you, every step we take, every policy we take is measured and it's aimed to help add more resilience and strength to our supply chains. So to help enable our economy, to help create more jobs for Canadians, and to help ensure that we have a safe and a healthy economy for everyone.
If I may ask to what Minister Alghabra was saying, I think you've seen some of our policy in action. Biomanufacturing comes to mind as a key example, but if you think in the aerospace sector, we've been able to land some of the key mandates, and I think even in the EV vehicle, you've seen that we've led mandates in Canada. I think, for example, I'll give you an example, like the critical minerals national strategy that we're putting together is going to help to increase the resiliency of our supply chain. And I think for me, this is a good example of policies and investments that we've done that are starting to pay dividend. Part of the thing that Minister Ang and I have been talking is also with our colleagues either at the White House in Washington or in Europe to think about how we better prepare as opposed to repair. We found ourselves as the West, I would say, despite significant investment in vaccines, in semiconductors, now we're seeing in batteries, the work that we've been championing with colleagues, with Minister Alghabra and all, many colleagues at Cabinet is how do we frame the next 20, 30 years? What are going to be critical to make sure that our supply chains are resilient and where Canada can play best in that? Whether it's in the critical minerals, the battery ecosystem, the semiconductors, the vaccines, and I would say some of the investments we've made and those that you're going to see soon, I would think in the battery ecosystem, are playing to Canada's strength as supply chain are becoming more regional. And thanks to the work of Minister Eng, you see that proximity to resources, proximity to market, proximity to the manufacturing base is playing to Canada's advantages. And we're certainly going to put them forward on the global stage, both here in North America and in Europe, as Minister Eng has been doing. And as we're all trying to attract investment and scale our production here in Canada.
Merci. Comme il reste peu de temps, j'aimerais demander aux gens qui posent des questions et au ministre de tenter de rester bref, s'il vous plaît. Opératrice, prochaine question.
Oui, merci. Thank you. Next question is from Wyatt Sharp from the Wyatt Sharp Show. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Hi there. Thank you so much for taking my question. My first question is going to be for Minister Alghabra as it relates to the truck convoy. So obviously I guess you could kind of differentiate them into two groups. One group being, the group of protesters who were doing terrible things like, making Terry Fox basically hold up an upside down Canada flag and people dancing on the tomb of the unknown soldier. But then it seems to me there's also kind of a second group of people, those who, weren't doing things like that, but are refusing to get vaccinated for maybe, things that, let's say, maybe they saw on social media. Do you see any path forward to maybe you perhaps meeting with, kind of the second group of people and trying to convincing them to get vaccinated? And again, just because a large portion of them could probably be, persuaded just because, maybe they don't want to get vaccinated at this present moment for, again, let's say something they, saw online or on social media.
Yeah, thank you for this question. And look, it is the job of our government and our ministers to listen and to hear various feedback and to work with everyone who wants to advance the best interest of Canada and Canadians. And you highlighted an important point. We will never give up on Canadians. We want to talk to all Canadians to ensure that they understand, they have all the information that they're looking for, to explain to them the science behind the vaccination and the reasons for it, not only for themselves, but for their loved ones and the community around them. But I also, think we need other voices because sometimes some of those, groups tend to distrust anything government says. And while we will never give up on them, but I think we also need other voices, other credible voices of doctors, of experts, of non-governmental organization to work together, neighbors, friends, so, I ask every Canadian to speak candidly and frankly with their friends. All of us know people who are still skeptical about vaccination. We all need to have an honest, a respectful conversation with them and explain to them the benefits and the values for vaccination. But we as a government will never give up on Canadians and we'll always do everything and examine all methods to be able to persuade Canadians of the value and the importance of vaccination.
And so then to follow up with you on that, Minister, I mean, in the press conference that was given, they basically said that they don't want to basically work with anyone who is moving forward with, let's say, additional lockdown measures or vaccination mandates. But as I mentioned before, there is still probably, a small portion of people who you could still convince to get vaccinated. But how realistic is it to, say that, you will be able to convince these people who aren't yet vaccinated to be vaccinated? Because at this point, there's been, a fairly long time since, eligible to get the vaccination. So just realistically, how, do you think these people will get vaccinated, and what do you think it will, take to persuade them that vaccination is the way to go?
We will continue to, as I said, we won't give up on Canadians. We will use tools that we have of persuasion, of mandates, of collaboration, of utilizing testimonials from experts. So we will do whatever we can because, look, let me take it back to the broader point is that people are frustrated. People want to end this pandemic. People don't want any more lockdowns. People don't want any more disruptions to their lives. And I share with them, and my colleagues here share with them that desire. But we all know that key to getting there is vaccination. So, look, we will do what we can. And obviously, there's going to be a lot of feedback into us how we can do it better. And I'm happy to hear input from others about how we can do it better. But I know we also need to rely on other voices in society to help us get there.
Okay, so we'll head to the last question, operator.
Thank you, merci. La prochaine question. Next question is from Jen Skerritt from Bloomberg News. À vous la parole. Please go ahead.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Hello?
we can.
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, okay, good.
Yes,
Thank
we
you.
can.
Perfect, wonderful. I just wanted to kind of follow that with just what kind of disruptions in the supply chain, if any, is Canada seeing right now just because of the vaccine mandate with the U.S. border? Even taking a few thousand trucks off the road, is that having any impact? If so, what?
Thank you for the question. Let me be very clear. Every day, myself and my colleague, Mr. Medicino, the Minister of Public Safety, are looking at the data of truckers crossing the border. And it is clear to all of us that this mandate has not had a measurable impact on the volume of traffic crossing our borders. The first week of the mandate, even though there was a massive snowstorm, even though it was a U.S. holiday, we had almost 100,000 truckers cross the border. And this second week, we saw a continuation of this trend. So there is no sign whatsoever that the mandate has had an impact on the volume of trucking crossing the borders. But let me be clear. That does not mean that there aren't any supply chains disruption. It does not mean that there aren't any challenges that we have. It doesn't mean that people aren't finding enough truckers to carry their load. And by the way, not just internationally to the U.S., but also domestically. Doesn't mean that there aren't some products taking longer than usual to get to retailers. Those are issues that existed before the mandate and continues today. They are caused by the disruption. And I want to also say thank you. Thank you to our truck drivers who are day in and day out, 24/7, delivering for Canadians, getting vaccinated and doing their jobs where Canadians depend on the service that they provide. Thank you to Canadian truck drivers.
Thank you. And if I could just follow up on that, I guess, you kind of mentioned that there are obviously some disruptions in the supply chain. Where are the worst choke points right now, and kind of how do you deal with that in the short term?
Thank you. And there are several choke points. I would say one of them is certainly our Pacific Gateway. There's a lot of vessel traffic and containers issues coming from Asia. And the second one is labor shortage that is being experienced across all sectors, including the trucking sector. So labor shortage continues to be an important or a challenging issue for our supply chain.
Merci beaucoup. Ça met fin à la conférence de presse. Thank you, Minister.
Can I add one more point? Because I'll be quick. We shouldn't forget about the biggest issue that we dealt with on the West Coast, which was the flooding, the climate event that took place where, freight rail were disrupted, were stopped, in fact. So climate change is also having a massive impact on our supply chain. Sorry for interrupting our moderator.
Merci. Donc, c'est terminé and you're forgiven, Minister Alghabra.
Merci tout le monde. Bonne journée.
Have a good day. Thank you, everybody.
Merci. Thank you.
Merci.